We all know there's a lot to be done in the autism advocacy space, trying to help the world understand autism and make the world a more autism-friendly place for autistic people. Today, I want to share two mainstream ideas that have nothing to do with autism necessarily, that are nevertheless radically transforming the world for autistic people. It all has to do with consent and trauma. And by the end of this video, hopefully you'll have an idea of how revolutionary these two ideas can be for improving the world for autistic people. Hi everyone, Paul Mikulev here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. So autism advocacy often focuses on children, especially helping children through developmental delays, and also for autistic adults, we tend to focus on changing the environment to make it more suitable for autistic people so that we can participate in society more. And a common concept that a lot of advocates promote is that if there is an adjustment that's good for autistic people, it's probably good for everyone else as well. This is very true in classrooms, things like universal design for learning, allowing for processing time, giving people information in advance, allowing people to access information in a variety of ways. All of these things that we advocate for autism tend to improve the environment for everyone else as well. In this video, however, I'm going to share two radical new ideas that are starting to seriously gain traction in mainstream culture that also flow over with many benefits for autistic people. So the first concept is building a culture of consent. And essentially, this is around a person's personal physical boundaries, and it's the idea that I have the right to say no to someone else coming into my space, especially physically. So what this looks like in practice, a really good example is that even if it is socially appropriate to give someone a handshake or a hug or a kiss or something like that, then I am allowed to say no to that, even if it's something that previously would have been expected of me in a social situation. So this is especially true of children, right? We love to show affection to children, but the message that sometimes gives is that you should give uncle a hug or a kiss because he's expecting it and that's what you're supposed to do. There's a bit of a pressure to ignore how I feel about the situation. And if you're not feeling comfortable, then the message, especially for children, that they learn is even when I'm uncomfortable, I'm supposed to put myself in a physically uncomfortable situation because that's what society expects of me. So with a culture of consent, I see that whole idea radically changing. Now, when I was little, the word consent meant the piece of paper that you took home for your parents to sign so that you were allowed to go on a school excursion. That's what I thought consent was. As I got older, the word consent started taking on a much more sexual meaning. And we talked about consent as in getting consent, giving consent. Is a person able to give consent in terms of things like drugs, alcohol, age, things like that? Nowadays, this thing that I've labeled the culture of consent, it's taking it into a much broader space than that. It's not just consent over my body during sex, it's the ability to say yes or no to physical touch in general. I know I personally am a hugger. I previously used to hug basically everyone I knew. And I remember pre-COVID days, there were a handful of friends who just didn't respond to that very well. They never said no. They always said, okay, sure. But they would kind of tense up a little bit and it wasn't very nice. And I remember previously, the response to that was something like, oh, you need to learn how to hug better or something like that. Similar with a handshake. You're shaking someone's hand and they're like, okay, here, shake my hand. Previously, the social response to that was, don't worry, I'll teach you how to do a proper handshake. The culture of consent really challenges that to say, well, if someone is reacting in that way, maybe it's because they don't want a hug. Maybe it's because they don't want a handshake. And funnily enough, COVID really changed this in a lot of ways in terms of physical boundaries with people. I remember in the very early days of COVID, before our first lockdown, I had a meeting with a very prominent politician, and he went to shake my hand and I said, no, thank you. And it was fine because I had the excuse, there's this really scary new virus that we're hearing about in other parts of the world. We're starting to get 1 or 2 cases here. Let's just not shake hands today. That's going to be a good idea. And similarly, now, after COVID, very often it's a lot easier to ask, can we have a handshake? Is that appropriate? Can I give you a hug? How are you feeling today? All of those kind of things. It just makes it a lot easier and more natural and more practiced to actually ask these things instead of assuming, and instead of forcing someone into a situation that they don't really want to be in. I remember a particular friend of mine, the very first time I asked her if she wanted a hug, she said, "Yes, please." And that had a huge impact on me, obviously, because I'm repeating the story years and years later. But the difference between okay and yes, please, like I just felt such a huge difference there. She wasn't just saying okay, she was saying, yes, I would like a hug, bring it in, please, let's go. And to me, that's indicative of what this shift is all about. It's increasing our minimum standards from, okay, I guess you can give me a hug, I suppose I don't really want to, but I'll say okay anyway because it's easier to choose resentment over discomfort, to reverse Brené Brown's famous mantra. From that to, yes, please, I would actually really like a hug right now. So please give me a hug, right? There's a really big difference between those two things. And you can even take this consent thing a lot further. For example, do I need to go to school camp? Do I need to go to Friday night drinks after work? Do I need to go to school at all? You might think, well, if we don't tell kids they need to go to school, then they just won't go to school. And if you actually think about it a lot further, if a kid does not want to go to school, we already have a problem there because there is something at school that they don't want to do. And whatever the problem is making itself manifest physically in a lack of motivation and avoidant behavior in this situation. So in that sense, saying, no, you have to go to school doesn't actually fix the problem. So from an emotional intelligence perspective, this is actually really powerful as well, because what this culture of consent allows us to do is check in, well, how do I feel about this situation? And that's not something that a lot of us are practiced at doing. In a social situation, very often my attention is, what am I supposed to be doing? And when someone asks me to check in, what do you want to do? Well, that's something I might not necessarily be very practiced at. And the more I practice at listening to the safety signals that my body is giving me, it helps me to make decisions about how to stay safe in the future. So if I had to summarize this shift, it's going from assuming consent, assuming that people are going to be okay with handshakes and hugs and kisses and things like that, and waiting for them to actively say no if they don't want it, to asking, checking in advance, and waiting for them to say yes before proceeding. And to make that work, there absolutely needs to be a free opt-out option with no negative consequences. If you're under duress, then your yes doesn't count. And that brings us to this second revolutionary idea, which is trauma-informed care. This is basically founded on the concept that people need to feel safe. Feeling safe is one of the core needs that we have in any given situation. And from a mainstream medical perspective, we've learned that those who have experienced trauma need an additional level of care to help them feel safe. So whilst the idea came about from treating people with PTSD and those who have experienced abuse and things like that, it is also incredibly relevant for the autistic population, since there are so many additional reasons we might feel unsafe. So in a nutshell, trauma-informed care is helping the person to calm their overactive nervous system that is on high alert for threats. So that means that when some people are especially sensitive to some things, we need to take that seriously to help them to feel safe in a situation. So this might include something like learning and avoiding someone's triggers, creating a calm sensory environment, and building trust in the relationship so that we feel like this person is safe. This person understands me. This person cares about me. This person is not going to hurt me, even accidentally. So when you think about what that looks like, a big part of that is making sure the sensory environment is okay. It's things like presenting information in advance so that I know what to expect and it's predictable and I can make sure that my needs are going to be met and there are not going to be any big surprises that take me off guard. When I interviewed Dr. Stephen Porges for my summit the other year, he was explaining how if you wanted to think about how to calm an overactive nervous system, don't think about how do I calm this stressed out, anxious person. Think about how would I calm a stressed out, anxious kitten. In some of my other videos, I've recommended a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which is all about our physiological trauma response. And it really helps to understand that it's not a conscious thing. It's not a chosen thing. It's our bodies literally overreacting to the world around us. And with trauma-informed care, we know how that works and we know what we can do to actively help a person feel safe, actively bring their brain back online because it gets hijacked sometimes. And what this means for the autistic population, at least, is that the environment and the people around us are going to be more accessible. And one of the simplest things that we can do to make an environment safe, socially safe at least, is to have a no questions asked opt-out option. And this is where the overlap with a consent culture comes in. I have the ability to say no and to walk out or to take a break whenever I need to, and there's not going to be the social pressure to do it anyway, even when I don't want to, even when my body says it's not safe, even when I don't feel good about the situation. So knowing that there is a no questions asked opt-out option automatically helps people feel safe in the situation. So at the moment, there are really only pockets of society that feel this safe. And when you walk into a space, well, when I walk into a space that is facilitated in a way to ensure these things, I can physiologically feel the difference. And the difference is that I know that I don't need to do anything I don't want to do. And that automatically makes me free to participate as much as I want to without the fear that someone's going to try and push me to do something I'm not comfortable with. So as a professional facilitator, I know that it's possible to create this kind of space with a group. I've also seen people do this within their families. I've seen communities do this. There are some autistic groups that I've been a part of that kind of naturally lean towards these kind of everything is fine, you can opt out at any time kind of guidelines for the whole group. And it just allows people to participate at the level that they are capable of, knowing that they're not going to be pushed any further. So the next really exciting step is how much further is this movement going to go in mainstream society, and what effect is that going to have on accessibility for the autistic population? So anyway, I might leave it there. I'm curious to see if you've already encountered this culture of consent that I was describing, or if you've already had experiences with trauma-informed care where the people that you've been dealing with have really truly understood that your reactions are physiological in nature and that it is absolutely 100% important to take sensory issues into account and to give up information up front and to make that situation safe and to have that opt-out option and all of those things. I know when I talk to someone who really gets it, it's just really nice, and it's so obvious when people don't quite get it. Sometimes you read these things on paper and you can kind of tell that the person has an intellectual understanding of it, but when you meet someone who really gets it, like at an emotional level, then that's a big change. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment. I'm curious to hear what you think about these two ideas and if you see them transforming the culture around you. Otherwise, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you again next week. Bye.